Since Tu Tien was driven away, the atmosphere in Tien's house had changed completely. His mother, who was once used to having someone take care of everything in the home, now had to manage everything on her own. There was no one to wake up early to cook breakfast, sweep the yard, feed the pigs, or care for the chickens and ducks. She had to shoulder every task herself, from the heavy chores to the small errands she had never bothered with before. Early in the morning she went out to the pig pen, and the stench made her wrinkle her nose. The pigs in the pen were grunting hungrily, so she had to grit her teeth as she loaded handfuls of feed into their trough. By the time she finished cleaning the pen, the chickens and ducks in the yard began clamoring for food. Her legs, once accustomed to sitting idle, now had to run back and forth, and sweat drenched her shirt. Before she could rest, she had to go to the garden to split bamboo and cut banana leaves to repair the leaking roof of the kitchen. The harsh sun beat down as if it were burning her, each drop of sweat carving deep lines into her weathered face. She panted heavily and, clutching a sickle with trembling hands, made a few cuts before stopping to lean against a post and sigh deeply. When she entered the kitchen and saw the pile of unwashed dishes and the disarray of the house, she felt an anger that choked her. In the past, Tu Tien had taken care of everything. Now that she was gone, the house was nothing more than a chaotic mess. She sat down heavily on a chair, throwing her conical hat to the side, her eyes filled with bitter resentment. She had never felt the absence of Tu Tien as painfully as she did now. I have raised her for years, and now by driving her away, I have only made my life miserable, she muttered bitterly. She turned to look at Tien, who was not much better. Since Hoai had been arrested, Tien had grown silent and no longer carried himself with arrogance. He did nothing to help, spending his days staring blankly, as if he were lost. The anger within her grew even stronger. She remembered the day she had sent Tu Tien away, laughing heartily then, but now the bitterness was overwhelming. A hard-working, patient and diligent daughter-in-law had been cast out, and she could not bear this any longer. She resolved that she must bring Tu Tien back, even if it meant getting wet in the process, and force her to come back and work for her. Tien's mother gripped the hand towel draped over her shoulder tightly, her eyes calculating. This time, she would not let Tu Tien slip away. Tien stood at the cave entrance, his eyes heavy as he saw Tu Tien sitting alone in a corner, her arms tightly hugging her knees. She looked frail, her face pale and drawn from years of hardship in the wilderness. Her eyes were cold, offering not even a glimmer of hope for him. "Tu Tien, come back with me," Tien said in a low, pleading voice. Tu Tien lifted her head slowly, her eyes vacant. "I have nowhere left to go," she replied. Tien swallowed hard, his heart twisting with regret. He was the one who had driven her to this point. On that day when she begged to stay, he had callously turned her away in disgrace. Now, having lost everything, he finally realized how important she was. But was it not too late? Unable to persuade her, Tien turned and walked away, yet he did not give up. The next day, Tien returned, carrying a prepared chicken, carefully wrapped in banana leaves. He found Tu Tien by the fire, her old clothes covered in dust as she tended the flame. Watching her quietly in the midst of the barren surroundings, he felt his heart tighten. "I brought you some food," Tien said, as he placed the package of chicken in front of her. Tu Tien did not look at the food, nor did she look at him. She simply continued adding more firewood to the small blaze. After a while, she spoke softly. "Do you think that just by bringing some food I will come back?" Tien was at a loss for words. He did not expect her to return immediately, but he wanted her to understand that he truly regretted his actions. "I know I was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to come back so that you do not have to suffer like this." Tu Tien managed a bitter smile. "Suffer? How I live is my own business. I would rather not come back and be looked down on, only to be cast out again." Tien clenched his fists. He knew she had endured too much pain, yet he still wished to hold on to her. "I will not let that happen again. Come back, no matter what. The home will always be yours." Tu Tien remained silent for a long time, then said softly, "A home? I have not had a home for a long time." Those words cut Tien deeply. He knew that no matter what he did, she no longer wanted to return to that place. It was not that she was stubborn, her heart had simply grown cold. The wind howled along the rocky wall, carrying away the ashes from the fire. Tien understood that this time, she had truly let go of everything. Tu Tien sat quietly at the entrance of the cave, her eyes gazing into the endless forest. After refusing to return home, she knew that she had truly severed all ties with the past. With nowhere to lean and no one left to call family, she was forced to take care of herself. Early in the morning, as the sun barely rose, she slung her old woven basket over her shoulder and followed the familiar dirt trail into the forest to gather wild greens. The handfuls of wild vegetables and the clusters of forest leaves that she had never paid much attention to before had now become her only source of sustenance. Her thin hands worked quickly as she plucked tender leaves, her eyes carefully selecting only what was edible. She carefully placed them into the basket and then continued deeper into the forest. In the vastness of nature, Tu Tien appeared small and silent like a shadow. No one knew who she was, and no one cared whether she lived or died. But she was used to it. She no longer felt sad or ashamed. After gathering enough greens, she returned, her steps heavy along the bumpy dirt road. Drops of sweat trickled down her forehead, yet she did not stop. She had to take the vegetables to the market to sell them, otherwise she would have nothing to eat. The village market was busier than she had expected. She quietly sat in a corner, spread out a small cloth, and arranged bunches of fresh green vegetables on it. No one paid her any attention. No one asked how she was doing. She was just a poor woman sitting by the roadside, selling things of little value. Someone passed by and looked at her with pity. An elderly woman stopped, picked up a bunch of greens, and gently asked, "Little one, why do you look so worn out? Where is your home?" Tu Tien lowered her head and replied softly, "I live in the forest. I gather greens and bring them here to sell." The old woman sighed and did not ask further. She simply bought a few bunches of vegetables and quietly left. Late in the afternoon, after selling all her greens, Tu Tien quietly walked to a familiar stream. She bent down to wash her face. The cool water made her feel more awake. She looked at her calloused hands and the small cracks that had formed from overwork. She was no longer the girl she once was. She sat by the stream for a long time, letting the water flow over her bare feet. The sun slowly disappeared behind the trees, and darkness came to envelop the entire forest. Tu Tien knew that life would bring many more challenges, but no matter what, she would never look back again. Tu Tien walked quietly along the dirt road back to the cave after bathing in the nearby stream. Her bare feet stepped on cool stones, with lingering droplets still clinging to her thin skin. She did not rush, and she no longer felt as if anyone were chasing her. Everything now felt light and unbound. Just then, a motorcycle stopped by the roadside. A man in an inspector's uniform got off, recognized her, and quickly asked, "Where are you going? Why are you walking alone like this?" Tu Tien recognized him as Mr. Than, the inspector she had met when she went to the market to sell vegetables. After hesitating for a moment, she replied, "I'm going home, but the road is so far. I have been walking since morning." The man looked at her with compassionate eyes. He knew that this young woman had suffered many injustices and had been forced to live in the forest because of the cruelty of her in-laws. Without much thought, he offered to give her a ride. "Come on, get on, let me drive you home. It is too long to walk like this." Tu Tien hesitated for a moment and then sat on the motorcycle. She did not think much about it. She was simply grateful for his kindness. When they reached the cave, Mr. Tan took some food out of his basket and placed it in front of her. "I see that living alone is very hard for you. Take this food and use it. Do not be shy." Tu Tien bowed her head in thanks. She was not used to receiving help from anyone, but she felt warmth in her heart from this genuine care. At that very moment, a figure appeared in the distance. Tu Tien's mother-in-law stood frozen, her eyes cold and full of suspicion as she witnessed the scene before her. She did not wait a second longer. She immediately turned and ran back to the village with one thought in her mind: she is having an affair. She is colluding with that inspector. She rushed straight home, her breath coming in short, hurried gasps, and recounted everything to Shen in an angry tone. "If you do not believe it, go see for yourself. She was sitting close with that old man and he even gave her food. Didn't I always say that she was good for nothing?" Tien's face turned dark. He could no longer think clearly. All that remained inside him was a surge of bitterness and anger. Without saying another word, he took out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hello, brothers. Gather tonight. I have something to settle." On the other end, a rough voice responded, "What is it? Who needs to be dealt with?" Tien gripped the phone tightly, his eyes blazing red. "Come to the inspector's house. I want to teach him a lesson." After receiving orders from Tien, the gang immediately set out. For them, as long as money is involved, anyone can be a target. On the deserted road, Mr. Phan walked, while lost in thought about the girl he had helped. He couldn't understand why a kind person like Tu Tien had been driven to the edge, but he didn't have much time to ponder. From a distance, a group of motorcyclists sped toward him, blocking his path. Before he could react, he was dragged into a vehicle. Before he could utter a word, a heavy punch struck him square in the face. "Old man, who gave you the right to mess with someone else's woman?" one of them shouted. Mr. Tan staggered, trying to stay upright, but was repeatedly kicked to the ground. The brutal blows sent waves of pain through his body, yet he had no chance to fight back. They attacked without mercy, each punch and kick landing without hesitation. Blood began to trickle from the corner of his mouth. He wanted to scream, to ask why he was being treated this way, but no one cared. After a period of ruthless violence, they stopped. One of them pulled out his phone and dialed Chien's number. "All done. That old man probably won't live much longer." Tien replied coldly. "Good. Get lost." They left, leaving Monsieur Tan lying motionless on the ground with blood gushing. But the fury of Tu Tien's mother-in-law was far from over. After hearing the news of Mr. Tan being beaten, she wasn't as pleased as expected. In her heart, an old grudge still festered against Tu Tien. She decided to head to the cave where Tu Tien was living. Under the scorching sun, she marched without pausing for rest. Her eyes burned with anger as she remembered that her former daughter-in-law was still living peacefully after everything. When she arrived, she rushed in and found Tu Tien gathering vegetables beside a small fire. "How dare you continue living so peacefully?" Tu Tien looked up, stunned at the sight of her mother-in-law. Before she could react, a sharp slap struck her face. "You filthy woman, I will never let you be." Tu Tien clutched her face as silent tears streamed down, yet she did not fight back. This time, there was no escape. The unbridled fury of her mother-in-law was like a raging storm, ready to sweep everything in its path.
Được nỗi lòng mà cô đang gánh chịu. Sau một hồi trầm tư, ông nhẹ nhàng nói: "Cô gái, có chuyện gì vậy? Sao cô khóc ở đây?" Lời nói ấm áp ấy như thắp lên tia hy vọng, khiến Tử Tiên gật đầu và đi theo ông. Người đàn ông dẫn cô đến gặp trưởng thôn, người đứng đầu làng với tấm lòng nhân hậu. Tại nhà trưởng thôn, ánh mắt thông cảm của ông dường như xoa dịu phần nào nỗi buồn của cô. Hiểu rõ số phận con dâu bị nhà chồng đối xử bất công, trưởng thôn quyết định can thiệp vào vụ việc. Ông cùng Tử Tiên quay trở lại nhà Chiến, mong tìm được lối nhỏ cho cô vào giữa bão tố cuộc đời. Khi vừa bước nhà, không khí lạnh lẽo đầy căng thẳng bao trùm. Mẹ chồng của Tử Tiên, giọng chua ngoa và ánh mắt quắt lên tiếng khinh miệt khi thấy cô trở lại. Cái nhà này không chứa chấp cái loại đàn bà như thế." Sự khinh miệt ấy mở đầu cho một cuộc tranh cãi gay gắt. Trưởng thôn trấn an đề nghị chia tài sản công bằng, cho cô một phần gia súc như trâu heo gà để có vốn sống. Tuy nhiên Chiến, người chồng cũ, lạnh lùng tuyên bố cô ta đã ra khỏi nhà này, đừng có mong lấy bất cứ thứ gì. Lời nói của gã càng làm không khí căng tràn.